Thank you, Kemble, and good afternoon, everybody, in advance of what will be a beautiful weekend, I am told. I wanted to give the big solutions perspective. That's what I was charged with doing, and to do so really from a perspective of the institutions of accomplishing solutions. And I think, so I'll hit on three basic components, but I need to start, only fitting being here at the UN, I need to start by recalling the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg. Because a very remarkable thing occurred there in that very remarkable North-South conversation, where under the leadership of Secretary General Kofi Annan.
For dancing, don't leave. Have more time for dancing. Okay. You get home safe, and thank you for coming. We'll see you.
The natural systems that comes from energy production and delivery. So these are the essential elements that came out of Johannesburg that I think framed the next decade, but I think actually we fell short on delivery because the tendency was to retreat to the institutions that were dealing with these issues on more of a subject-by-subject basis, rather than broaden the conversation that's been focused on climate change to include the health impacts of energy and to include the security impacts of energy. In doing so, they also broadened the agenda for parties who are focusing on different issues. In countries that are producing a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, we have to do a heck of a lot about that. But there are many countries that's not their issue. They're not a producer of emissions. They need access. They need affordability. They need resiliency and security. And so first the leaders themselves opened up the conversation in order to bring more people on. I would compare that then with an institution that is also very important, but structurally when experts and the environmental ministers and the foreign ministers reach consensus on the need for urgent action to address climate change. I would suggest to you at that moment the entire enterprise then should have shifted and been turned over to the energy ministers, the transportation ministers, and the finance ministers to deliver the mechanisms of treaty implementation. Instead, it resided cut emissions by 50% by 2050, which all the leaders in the world have signed up to. If you think of that goal, you have to cut 40 gigatons of projected emissions. And now, what does 40 gigatons mean? Nobody knows what that means. I'm sure you saw charts earlier today that talked. I want to give it to you in practical terms. So 40 gigatons. Let me give you an example. 1 gigaton, just one of the 40 we need, is 273 zero-emission coal-fired power plants. One doesn't exist on Earth today. Right? So I've got to find a way to do that just to get 1 gigaton. 1 gigaton is 1,000 geologic sequestration sites like the one in Norway. 2 more are on the way. 1 gigaton is 1,000 of those. Nuclear power. 1 gigaton is 136 new nuclear power plants replacing coal plants. There are 400 on Earth today. So let's imagine you could double or triple that. I can get 3 or 4 gigatons. So I can see achievability there. Efficiency, taking all the cars in America and making them 20 miles per gallon more efficient. Well, we have a law that's going to do 3/4 of that. Can we do it again in America? So one could imagine, achieving 2 or 3 from that. Wind, you've got to take 3 times the global capacity of windmills. You need about 270,000 more to get 1 gigaton. Solar, you need to increase the current capacity in the globe by 125 times. To get 1 gigaton. And then biofuels, take an area twice the size of the United Kingdom that's barren and convert it to biofuels. These are big numbers, big projects. Is it achievable? In my view, absolutely. Because if you look at the scale of the energy system we have, it's on par with the scale of the energy system we need that's cleaner, but it requires a level of energy and activity that's higher than all of the individual interesting projects that we talk about. We don't have a scalable conversation going on right now. Now, one other point I'll make is technology is available to do this today without inventing a single new piece of technology. I want new technology. We should invest in new technology, but we can get to a more secure, cleaner, and low-carbon energy future with the technologies we've got if we choose to use them all. And that's the big, it's a political issue, a systems issue, not a technology issue. And I'm happy to answer questions about that. So it really is about those public, private, and financial arrangements. So then let's look at politics and policy then. What are the impediments to scale? Well, we know that 50% of the problem is using coal. So how do we either make coal cleaner and low carbon or find all the available alternatives to coal? 20% of the current and future problem is petroleum to move people around in cars. Forget about planes and ships. They're a small piece of it. It's people and personal mobility. Well, we know we have to make that system as diverse as the power generation system. We need to move off of exclusively petroleum or diesel and get into electricity and biofuel efficiency and all the other forms that allow for mobility. We have to go after that really aggressively. And then 20% of the current and future problem is land use. And as I've indicated, in the developed world, we're making more food on less land. And so we know the technologies, we know the practices. It's the institutional arrangements in the developing world that have to be put in place to accomplish what we need to accomplish. So these are matters of political will, not anything else. So as we look at the policies to pull that off, we tend to fixate on little policies. You know, $10 billion project here. We tend to fixate on this little wind thing over there. The fact of the matter is every country on earth has a multifaceted suite of policies. And they include mandates, incentives, technology programs. And every one of us has probably been involved in one or the other. But the one policy we continue to miss is markets. The market that in the course of just 10 years enabled this. You know, that's a powerful, powerful thing. So we have to understand better what are the market dynamics that produce mass reproducibility and make it really cool and desirable and effective and useful. That's what we have to understand. Flat panel screens, you know, we didn't have them 15 years ago. And so what happened? They became grotesquely efficient. And so we made bigger ones, right? So we have to understand those dynamics. And yet they're everywhere in the world today, flat panel screens. It happened overnight. So what is it that allows our systems, our energy systems, our water systems, to allow for that rapid transformation? And then part of it is then the tension in politics and policy between wanting to do it all yourself, let's have maximum energy security, or recognizing the global interdependence and having a more effective system of well-managed interdependence, which goes beyond just oil. We talked about pipelines and transmission lines, but really it's the interdependence of a global supply chain when it comes to delivering modern, efficient energy systems. And we haven't even begun to get our heads around that. We can't even get tariffs eliminated on new technologies globally when it comes to energy efficiency and cleaner technologies, and yet we've eliminated them when it comes to information technology. I submit to you, if it worked for information technology, we should do it for energy technologies too, and imagine the market force of that without any government people getting involved. So we need to think that way. Finally, one other construct for politics and policy. There's a bit of a social moral dimension to this, which, and I ask this question quite earnestly in relation to the United States, are countries that can, using what they can. The United States is not using its capability to use nuclear energy to produce zero-emission power. And yet we can. But we're not. So instead, we're using a lot of coal. And we're using increasing amounts of natural gas. And so one of the questions for the world is, if we can use this bigger source and effectively and safely do it, should we? Must we? This is an important question because as we use more natural gas, less of natural gas is available to countries that do not have access to the kind of resource base that we have. These are useful questions to ask. And then when it comes to institutions, we now have all of the leadership institutions focused on energy. The UN General Assembly, the G8, grew to the G13, grew to the major economies, grew to the G20. So they're all talking about it, but their agendas for action are thin gruel. Because it still comes back to the development agenda, it still comes back to the global finance agenda, and it still comes back to the technology innovation and dissemination agenda. And these leadership bodies, that's not what they do. So they can set the vision, but they don't do the execution. And by the way, neither do the financing, trade, and investment treaty authorities. They create the enabling condition, but they do not produce the outcomes. And neither do the regulatory treaty authorities. We must have standards for ozone. We must have standards for greenhouse gases. We must have standards for fishing capacity. But once you set those standards, how can we move beyond them into the institutional arrangements that enable broader markets and performance-based mechanisms to achieve those goals? We tend to lead with the goal, the regulatory outcome, rather than thinking, how do we enable the opportunities that avoid it? Which means we have to get, and in Johannesburg, that one outcome of Johannesburg that was most important was public-private partnerships. And we talk about them, we're building them. They exist now, but they don't exist at scale. So how do we move to a system in which our challenges that we've identified when it comes to a cleaner, more sustainable energy system has government and the private sector side by side, one-third, with the public, right? How do you get that triangle established, as the prior panels have discussed? We do not have the institutional arrangements to do that at scale. I can give you examples. We don't have them at scale. So with that, I just want to pull full circle. As you do public-private partnerships, we need to get the water people in the same room as the energy people, with the finance people, not have separate conversations. So it's not just sectoral, it's intersectoral. And we don't have the institutions to do that either. So I'll end